Okay, guys, so here we go, talking through these monetary policy FRQs. So first of all, you have to notice that Rankin Land is in recession. So to do part A, we're going to assume that Rankin Land only produces two items, food and clothing. So we're going to draw a correctly labeled production possibilities curve. And then we are going to show a point that could represent the current output and label it A. All right, so remember your PPCs are always just going to have your two items. So food on one side and clothing on the other. It doesn't actually matter which one is on which graph. Then you just have your line connecting them. It can be straight or curved. We don't have any information about the substitutability. The last thing about the recession, though, that means that they are not producing as much as they could, which means that, remember, any point along the production possibilities curve means a full use of resources. During a recession, you're not using all of your resources. So that's the thing. A needs to be on the inside of that curve. All right, now B, assume that the Central Bank of Rankin Land pursues an expansionary monetary policy, which of course makes sense given that they are in recession. Identify the open market operations that they would use. All right, so B1, open market operations. I've warned you about this in class. Open market operations is not it's one of the three tools of fiscal policy. So there is only one correct answer here. The open market operation that is expansionary is to buy bonds. There's no explain. You don't have to say anything else. Just buy bonds. Number 2, draw a correctly labeled money market graph and show the short run effect of the expansionary policy on the nominal interest rate. So we're going to draw our graph for the money market. So we have our D money, demand for money. We've got quantity of money down here, and then interest rate here, and that is the nominal interest rate. So we know that in the market for money, we have a supply of money, which is vertical, and by buying bonds, we make the money supply big. So SM1, we go from IR to IR1, nominal IR, and we show that the nominal interest rate goes down. And that's it for 2. So assuming no change in the price level, what happens to the real interest rate as a result? This is actually kind of an odd question. And to make it and explain is tough too. So the answer is it also falls. And the reason for that is basically there's no reason to think that price level is going to change, right? Price level is constant. And if price level is constant and the nominal falls, then the real must fall. It's almost so easy that it feels tricky. It's kind of an odd question. I don't know. But we have to be prepared for odd questions. So, I actually think it's kind of nice for you guys to see that because periodically it does matter that way. Now, given your answer in B3 regarding the real interest rate, what will happen to real gross domestic product in the short run? So, real GDP will rise. Because, and remember there's an explain, so this is what real GDP will rise, and then why is our explain. And that is because interest rate sensitive spending will rise. You could talk about investment. You could talk about interest rate sensitive consumption. That would be okay. But you definitely need to say that interest rate sensitive spending will rise. And then you need to say, therefore, AD will shift right. In the short run. So there you have it. There is the answer for the first one. Now let's move on to the second. In country Z, the reserve ratio is 10%. Assume the central bank sells $50 million in government securities on the open market. All right, so A1. calculate each of the following. So the total change in reserves in the banking system. So this is, again, it's kind of easy, which almost makes it feel tricky. So 50 million is the total change in reserves in the banking system because basically it's like the inverse of the total change to the money supply in a sense. So we're going to do the second one and then you'll kind of see the maximum possible change in the money supply. So for this, we know that our multiplier is 1 over the reserve ratio, which is going to give us 10. So 10 times 50 equals 500. Okay, now because they are buying from the, the central bank sells government securities on the open market. Because they're selling on the open market, that's all new money. Okay, so we have excess reserves and then our required reserves. The total change in reserves is basically that that amount in reserves that gets hung back. Okay, so it is, remember how we said, and because they're buying on the open market, this doesn't happen. But if they were just buying from, the public and that kind of thing, it's equivalent to the total amount minus the initial, which is why we have that 50 million. Okay, so moving on to B. So our correctly labeled graph of the money market showing the impact of the central bank's bond sale on the nominal interest rate. So this is going to be the similar graph to what we just did a second ago. So we have our downsloping demand for money, and then we have our quantity of money, nominal interest rate here, our initial supply of money, and then our new supply of money. And remember, selling makes small, so we go from this lower nominal interest rate to this now higher nominal interest rate. There should be a 1 there. So that is what you have there. So what is the impact of the central bank's bond sale on the equilibrium price level in the short run? It will fall. So this basically, I think if this were a newer question, they would probably give you some kind of information about whether we're looking at the neoclassical or the Keynesian perspective. There's no reason to assume sticky prices, which is why if there were an assumption of sticky prices, then you would argue that they remain the same, but there's no reason to assume that. So we're going to go with the neoclassical answer. But honestly, I think that they would clarify that a little bit more in a newer question. Okay, D, as a result of the price level change in Part C, are people with fixed incomes better off, worse off, or unaffected, and explain. So because the price level is falling, people on fixed income are better off because purchasing power rises. So whenever the price level falls, that's a deflation situation, which means purchasing power is going to rise, which means that those on fixed income are better off. So there you have it, gentlemen.